Hey, lovely peeps. Guess where we're at? We have arrived at Module 4, Lesson 1. And so it's now time for us to essentially change up gears. We are moving into an introduction to threat physiology, right? So like I said, we're changing gears. Up to now, we've been focused much more on the behavioral, psychological, motivational aspects of threat, if you will, right? So understanding kind of what's going on up in the head level much more than anything else. But what makes a mind map coach really different is that ultimately we're assessing and addressing not just psychology, but physiology too. Right. So we're not just kind of looking at kind of how to motivate a person and, how to kind of get them to take action. We're actually working in alignment with threat physiology. Okay. So when we're talking about fight, flight, and freeze, these are physiological aspects. When we're talking about the threat response, when we're talking about the amygdala triggering and all that kind of stuff, this is all kind of within the areas of physiology, neurology, endocrinology, and so on and so forth, right? So what makes a mind map coach different to most coaches is that we're not just relying on psychology. We're not just relying on a few choice questions to nudge people along. And that's not to put any other coach down. Kind of, it's amazing what you can do with a few choice questions. But I guess what I'm saying here is that by understanding threat physiology to a greater level, it opens so many more doors up to us, right? But look, don't let that threaten you. Don't let that be scary to you. We're about to move into physiology and endocrinology, because see, a lot of people are, and if you come from a background where you've not been a health coach, where you don't really understand the finer workings of this amazing human body, it would be all too easy kind of to let the idea that we're about to start looking at how the body works, how the nervous system works, how the hormonal system works, and all of that kind of stuff. It would be very easy to let it threaten you, but I don't want you to, and that's why we've left it to this point of the program, right? So we left threat physiology and endocrinology till right now, so that you'd have the time and the space and the ability to neuroassociate all the fundamentals of threat-based coaching, which is what you've already been doing, right? So at this point in the program now, you already speak in the language of threat. You already speak in terms of fight, flight, and freeze. And you already speak in terms of things being too fast, too slow, unclear intent. And you already speak in terms of kind of the amygdala triggering and the hippocampus and all this kind of stuff. You already speak it. So guys, you're already speaking in terms of physiology. And I've left this to this point, so you owned the basis of threat physiology in layman's terms, so that when we got to this part, as we start to dig a bit deeper into it, you're not so terrified about digging into it, right? Yes, maybe some of the terms will be a little bit new, but I have been threading them into the program. But I wanted to make sure that you owned your journey as a coach before we got into this part, the how the nervous systems work and all that kind of stuff, right? So this module is going to take you much, much, much deeper into, I guess you could say the mind-body approach, right? So that you can both assess the effects and address the causes of your client's threat. Okay, not just on a psychological, psycho-emotive kind of level, but on a physical level as well. Okay, so let's see. By the end of this particular module, you'll be able to understand why some of your clients are stuck in cycles of pain like chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia and stuff like that, right? You'll be able to understand why some of your clients' injuries never seem to heal. They're kind of those clients who went over on ankles or knees or wrenched their back like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years ago and still don't seem to be getting well. Well, you'll have an understanding of that, and it's not just based in psychology. You'll have an understanding of it based in physiology also. You'll have an understanding like why some pains just simply don't seem to go away, why so many diet plans and training programs fail to deliver results, even if the clients are doing, air quotes, all the right things, right? So you've got clients that are dieting down and they're cutting their calories back and they're training really, really hard in order to, let's say, lose weight or get to a smaller size, and yet their programs aren't working. And they're being told by other professionals that either they're underreporting, which is just a code word for lying, right? They're saying that they're exercising more than they actually are, or they're saying that they're eating less than they actually are. But effectively, they're being accused of lying, or they're being made to feel like some kind of failures, right? Well, this program's going to this module is going to explain to you why it's possible for a person to be doing all the right things and still not being able to get the body fat loss or the body composition change losses and such. An area that very few people are talking about, and it's an area that if you're from a personal training background, generally tends to bring up quite a lot of contention. There are a lot of experts out there who tell you that it's just a simple case of thermodynamics, and if you just burn enough calories, the body will lose the weight. Well, that's good in theory, but there's a lot more going on in the human body than just a kind of a calorie burning furnace, as you'll learn during this module. You'll also be learning about why some conditions such as IBS or leaky gut, etc., are far easier to address than most people think, and you'll be learning a hell of a lot more on top of that, right? You'll also be learning some simple yet really, really powerful coaching interventions and self-care exercises to create much better results that actually last, right? So look, here's the reality. To keep this part of the program as understandable, as usable, as useful, and as enjoyable as possible, I'll be doing what I've done throughout the entire mastery program and starting in these small, easily digestible portions that we'll return to and build on over and over again. So that big circular pattern. We'll touch on a concept, we'll move on from it, and we'll kind of figure out how we can use that. We'll move on from it, we'll talk about some other things, and then we'll come back to that concept and kind of build on it a little bit more. And we'll just keep looping back around so that you get this nice 360 degrees perspective of what threat physiology and what threat endocrinology looks like, how it is impacting upon your client, and how you can actually use this knowledge to be a better coach. Okay, so not just be a better coach in terms of the questions you ask and all that kind of stuff, but when there's guidance to give, or when there's exercises for them to try out, or when there's safe havening processes and protocols, you understand them at a deeper level, which means that you get behind them more. Because let's be honest, there are some exercises that you've been taught in this program, like, let's say, many people kind of have cut corners on things like the safe havening and all kinds of things, because up until now it sounded like a good idea, but it just maybe didn't feel like it was something that you had enough time for, right? We've got 1 hour, we've got a lot of stuff to get through, we haven't got time to safe haven and all that kind of thing. Well, actually, as you get further and further into this program, particularly when you are working with clients in threat, you're going to see why it's so important for them to safe haven before you start to actually do the real work of coaching. Okay? In fact, you could argue that the safe havening is the real work of coaching. So let's begin, shall we? We start with our kind of the first pass of the nervous systems. Okay, so let's start right there. The human nervous system. Ultimately, the human nervous system, it can be divided into what we currently call the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, right? So that is that you've got the nervous system as the whole, and it branches down into these two primary branches, right? Kind of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is the brain, right, and the spinal cord, and ultimately you could consider the central nervous system as the master control center, right? You could really say that this part here is. This is us, right? The brain and the spinal cord is who we actually are. And everything else, like the meat and the bone that carry us around, all that muscle and stuff, that's just kind of like more like the machine that's designed to carry us around, right? So I know some people would take issue with that. That's a bit of an oversimplification. But in many respects, like everything that we know ourselves to be really is in that kind of blob of mass there within the brain and the spinal cord. So everything that we are thinking, every movement that we're going to make, every reactive movement, every responsive movement, every proactive movement, every heartbeat and movement of our bowels and everything starts by a decision being made between these couple of parts of the human body, the brain and the spinal cord. So we also have the other section, which is called the peripheral nervous system, right? And you could say that the peripheral nervous system is really like your body's link to the world. Okay, it's your body's link to the world. So the peripheral nervous system is essentially kind of it's the sensory nervous system, right? And so kind of let me just go back to that slide for a second. So when I say it's the body's linked to the world, this is how, kind of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or the sensory side of who we are, not just our ability to sense, but also our ability to move, is coming off of the peripheral nervous system. So now let's take that. If we divide the peripheral nervous system down again, the peripheral nervous system breaks down into what we call the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Okay, autonomic and somatic. So let's look at the somatic nervous system first. So the somatic nervous system carries all of the sensory informations from the sense organs into the central nervous system, right? So everything you see, everything you hear, everything you touch, everything you taste, right? All of this information is coming in from your sensory organs and being passed to the spinal cord. Remember the central nervous system, right? So it's being passed to the spinal cord and up into the brain for the brain to say, okay, I have seen this, smelt this, heard this, felt this. What does it mean? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Right? Remember, the brain's first priority at all times is, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So all of this information comes in from the sense organs to the central nervous system. Okay, so this is part of the somatic nervous system. Then, once the brain has decided what to do with this sensory information, it translates it, and it's either going to say, okay, we are in threat, let's get ready to run the fight, flight, freeze program, right? So it's going to choose to do that, or it may actually spot an opportunity, and that opportunity might be for food, it might be for some form of human gratification, it might be for sex, it might be for any number of things, right? And in which case, it will activate the muscular system to either run away or move toward. Right? Simply that. So the somatic nervous system carries sensory information from the sense organs to the central nervous system, and it carries movement information from the central nervous system to what is called the voluntary motor system. Okay? Let's just have a little bit of peace and quiet there, right? What is the voluntary motor system? So the voluntary motor system are the muscles that you choose to contract. So if you say, okay, I'm going to get up and walk to the kitchen and make myself a cup of coffee, you have activated your voluntary motor system, right? Voluntary, as in it's chosen, motor, movement, and system, right? So you've essentially said, hey, I need to contract these muscles, and I need my calves, I need my glutes, I need my quads, I need my hamstrings, I need my core to contract, my arms to swing, all this kind of stuff to carry me out there. But it's completely a voluntary action. And this is the role of the somatic nervous system, right? So one more time, carries sensory information from the sense organs to the central nervous system, carries movement information from the central nervous system to the voluntary motor system. Okay, now we can actually break that down again, right? So kind of we just looked at kind of the one half. What about now this side, the autonomic nervous system? So that was the somatic nervous system. This is the autonomic. So what is the autonomic? Well, look, it regulates all autonomic subconscious activity. Autonomic is just like a medical word for automatic, right? So you could say you could easily exchange that up, and it would mean exactly the same thing: the automatic nervous system. Okay, but obviously, if you're speaking to people in the know and you want to sound like you're in the know, you want to be calling it the autonomic nervous system. But ultimately, this regulates everything that's happening at an automatic and subconscious level, right? So everything from your heart rate, your respiration, your digestion, your metabolism, the action of your pupils, dilating and constricting and all of that kind of stuff. You don't think about this. You don't say to yourself, okay, it's very, very bright today. Let me see if I can constrict my pupils. You don't say, okay, I'm very, very hot today. Let me see if I can change my metabolism to kind of start me sweating, right? You don't say, well, I'm going to sleep tonight. I really, really hope that I remember to breathe and that my heart remembers to keep beating, and so on and so forth. These are all done automatically for you. Okay, the brain is actually running this as a background pattern all by itself without any of your conscious input. Okay, therefore automatic, or using their term, autonomic. Okay, and so the autonomic nervous system further branches down again, right? So the autonomic nervous system branches down into what we call the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so let's look at the sympathetic nervous system first. And you already kind of noticed we haven't had specific discussions about this in this program yet, but I'm sure you've heard me speaking about it at various times. Sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is that branch of the nervous system that prepares the body for action. And again, remember, this is still part of the autonomic nervous system. This is happening automatically. You don't have to think your way into this. You don't have to say, okay, I need to elevate my heart rate. Okay, I need to start sweating. Okay, I need to kind of shunt blood off from my internal organs and push it out to my muscles. Your brain does all of that by itself, right? So you don't have to automatically think of this. So this is just another branch of the autonomic nervous system, and it's preparing the body for action. This is where kind of our threat response lives, right? So kind of we often call this, the sympathetic nervous system is kind of synonymous or kind of often called the fight or flight system. Okay, now it's a bit unfair to say it's just fight or flight. It's an action readiness system. So if you're going to engage in, if you're going to the gym, for example, and you're psyching yourself up for some heavy lifts and all the rest of it, and you're going to be contracting your muscles hard and all the rest of it, your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system will start to get excited. And that's the term, right? It will start to get excited, and it will prime your body ready for action. But more commonly, it's known as the fight or flight system. But just understand between us, and you'll find this as we go further into it, but it does a lot more than just prepares you for fight or flight. But fight or flight system is a good place for us to start this discussion. Okay, so we've got the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and then we've got the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, right? The parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest, it's all about repair, it's all about regeneration. Okay, and so kind of when you think about that, like our ability to regenerate as human beings, right? Our ability to stay young, our ability for our knee joints not to get worn out by the activity that we're engaged in, our ability for our wounds to heal, our ability to kind of fight off everything from the common cold to cancer to you name it, right? All of that is based upon our ability to regenerate. Well, our ability to regenerate, it comes off the back of our ability to get the body into its optimal system for repair. And then what that means is that the body has to be able to hit the right hormonal balance and the right delivery systems in order for all of the raw materials that enter the body via our food, for example, to be broken down and carried via both molecules of food, kind of broken down into things like proteins and such. And then on top of that, the hormones that kind of are responsible for our various human functions, right? So all of that repair is completely determined by how much rest we get. Okay, so rest determines repair, determines the regeneration. If we are not repairing, we don't regenerate. If we're not resting, we don't repair. So here's the interesting thing about this balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is an action-based system. In other words, it's the opposite of rest, right? When you're activating your sympathetic nervous system, you are doing the opposite of rest. If you are doing the opposite of rest, you are also doing the opposite of repair. If you're doing the opposite of repair, you are also doing the opposite of regenerate, right? So you're breaking, in other words, you are breaking down faster than you're able to rebuild. And this is from being, you could say, being air quotes, stuck in the wrong nervous system. So as much as the sympathetic nervous system is about fight or flight, the parasympathetic nervous system, you could say, is about rest and digest. And there's another big clue there, right? In order to actually extract, it doesn't matter how good your food is. You could be eating organic, elimination diet, friendly foods, drinking your greens drinks and all that kind of stuff. But if you are unable to get into your parasympathetic branch of your nervous system, your ability to both extract nutrition from your food, digest it, and metabolize it, and then turn that into the raw materials required for repair and regeneration goes down hugely. Okay, and so we've not reached that point in the program yet, but kind of hopefully that's giving you a little bit of a hint that actually by being in the wrong branch of the nervous system, we are costing ourselves a hell of a lot of our health-based benefits. Okay, we are also costing ourselves a lot of our fitness-based results. Like if you are currently trying to lose weight or build muscle, or you've got clients who are trying to do either of those, or they're trying to get well again after being really, really ill, or they are, they're kind of suffering from injuries that don't seem to go away and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's completely in alignment with what I'm teaching you here, that if they are stuck, for want of better expression, in the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, the action system, they are doing the opposite of rest, which means that they are not going to be able to extract the ultimate nutrients from their food, and they're not going to be able to go through the repair and regenerate phase. Okay, this is critically important, and I don't know about you, but when I very, very first learned this was like the hugest light bulb in my life at the time. Kind of still working predominantly as a personal trainer at the time and as a health coach. And when I learned this, I went, wow! I suddenly see why even my best programs and my best nutrition plans weren't working for some people. And yet, as soon as I was able to get them switched across to their parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, they were able to get much, much bigger results, much easier, much faster, and they were able to keep them much, much longer. And you're going to learn a little bit more about that during this particular module, all right? So, kind of just to recap, we got the central nervous system kind of working its way all the way down to where we're at right now, down to the sympathetic and parasympathetic. A big part of this program now is going to be focused specifically down at these two levels, right? These two branches of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. We may have a couple of visits up into kind of higher parts of the nervous system as we go on, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about how this nervous system of ours is broken down, and then get you to this point where you understand this really important distinction between sympathetic, fight or flight, action system, and parasympathetic, rest, repair, regenerate, rest and digest system. Okay, this is going to be vital in moving forward. Okay, so I believe the real work of a coach is about re-establishing the correct nervous system's response for the task at hand. Right, there's no such thing as a bad response. Like if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, then you need the fight or flight system in operation. And the fight or flight system makes you stronger, it makes you faster, it makes you more aggressive, it makes you more resilient, it makes you more kind of pain resistant, and so on and so forth. It's a really, really important system for keeping you alive. What it is, though, is a very, very terrible part of the nervous system for moving you into thrive-based activities, for having you look your best, feel your best, have maximum energy, spend the least amount of time in your kind of reptilian or mammalian brains, and spend the most amount of time in your human brain, right? So that you're up in your thrive activities. If you really, really want to get to the point where you and your clients are getting the most out of life, then moving people out of that kind of sympathetic branch and into the parasympathetic branch as often, as frequently as possible is vital. Okay, so by working with the brain, the mind, and the body responses, the impact of all the coaching that we're going to be applying and the coaching that you're already applying is going to extend far, far, far beyond the purely psychological and the motivational approaches of most coaches. Okay, it's going to take it much, much further, as you'll see. So in future lessons, much of the struggling and suffering that our clients are currently experiencing from being stuck is going to be, you're going to see it's going to basically be about an inappropriate level of sympathetic nervous system activity, right? So as we dig into these lessons, we're going to move through the heart and the liver and the various organs. We're going to look at respiration and all kinds of stuff. We're going to look all the way through, and we're going to see how sympathetic nervous system dominance is what pulls us out of our ability to really move to that thrive place. Okay. And ultimately, that our ability to create a parasympathetic nervous system dominant balance is the prerequisite for going human. So we've spoken a lot about going reptile, right? Or he went reptile, he went mammalian. Well, kind of if we want to go human and move into our thrive brains, the only real way to guarantee that with any level of certainty, with any level of prediction and response, is to have our clients moving into that parasympathetic nervous system frequently and stay there for as long as they possibly can, as long as it's appropriate at least, right? And just understand that without re-establishing that parasympathetic nervous system balance, the health of the body becomes a threat in its own right, okay? remember, if you can't rest and digest, if you can't actually go through repair and regeneration, then the body itself is going to become a threat, because the body itself is going to get sick. The body itself is going to experience pain. The body itself is going to get weaker and more brittle, and it's going to kind of, be limited in its functions. And as the body goes into pain, as it gets sick, as it gets weak, as it gets kind of less mobile, the brain itself has to switch to higher and higher and higher levels of alertness. Okay, and because obviously it needs to remain on alert all the time, just in case there's a physical threat coming into its environment. That's the way the brain works. If you can't read your environment so well, or if you can't move through your environment so well, that you are in a heightened level of sympathetic nervous system activity all the time. Okay, so we'll be covering that with a lot more depth as we move into this program. So throughout the remaining lessons of this module, we'll be looking at the various systems that affect and are affected by threat, and learning some really, really simple methods for addressing them through coaching. And ultimately, this is going to be, I think it's going to be a very, very important and enjoyable module for you. Don't worry if you don't come from a health coach background, and don't worry if you are not looking to move into the more health side of coaching. I think it's still going to be really important for you. At the very, very least, you're going to understand a lot more maybe of why some of your physical goals and some of your health goals are not being achieved right now. And so it's going to help you in those ways anyway. Okay, so keep them peeled. Enjoyable module coming up. So keep them peeled, and lesson 2 will be with you very, very shortly. Take care.